Now let's talk about some of the things that make it a little controversial with parents.
House.
Hello and welcome back to our house. If you're new here, welcome. If you'd like to go from questions to confidence when it comes to the Robinson curriculum, I'm here to answer questions. And in this video, we're going to talk about the RC book list. We're going to continue the series where we go through the entire RC book list. Now, for those of you that are not familiar, this is the curriculum that we use, and it's very minimalistic but effective. It teaches great study habits. It covers the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic in depth. And so the reading portion is this book list, and it covers a multitude of subjects within this list. So in this video, we're going to go through the whole list, and I'm going to share with you what category it falls under, who wrote it, what makes this book so great, etc. So I hope that this will be helpful to parents out there who are thinking about it or who are using the curriculum, but they don't have time to really research all the titles. This will help them feel confident in the books, in the quality, all of it. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so books 21 to 30, and if you're interested in the other books, you can go back and watch the series. I'll link it up. So number 21, Tom Swift and His Airship. This is under the literature category. These books originally came out in 1910. I have a few, I think these are originals, but there are a lot of reprints out there, and the new series have been as recent as, the 2000s, 2010s. But the main gist of these books are, right, they cover science, invention, and technology. Very deep with science, invention, and technology. Again, they were first published in 1910, but the series totals more than 100 volumes. The character was created by Edward Stratemeyer, and that name might sound familiar to you from the Rover Boys series. So this is another one of his series, but this series, Tom Swift, was written by various ghostwriters and are credited to the collective pseudonym of Victor Appleton. So you'll see these books and the author, Victor Appleton, but that is a ghost name. The character, though, the idea, this was Edward Stratemeyer's idea, his series. Now, there are 33 volumes of the second series, and he uses a different pseudonym for that name. That's Victor Appleton II. So if you're wondering, is this the first series of Tom Swift? Is this the second series? Well, look at the author. If it's Appleton 1, if it's just Appleton, it's the first series. Appleton 2 is the second series. It's been translated into many languages, and the books have sold more than 30 million copies worldwide. Now, Tom Swift has been cited as an inspiration by various scientists and inventors, including aircraft designer Kelly Johnson. And truly, this series has inspired many famous people today. They will tell you that they read these as a child, these books. Tom Swift, the premise is he's a teenager, inventive, science-minded, swift by name, swift by nature. Tom is portrayed as a natural genius. In the earlier series, he is said to have little formal education, so he's patterned after such inventors such as Henry Ford or Thomas Edison. For most of the 5 series, each book, basically it's the same thing, right? Tom's latest invention and its role either in solving a problem or mystery or in assisting Tom in feats of exploration or rescue. Kind of reminds me of Meet the Robinsons, if you've ever seen that Disney movie, because often Tom must protect his new invention from villains whose intent is on stealing Tom's thunder or preventing his success. But Tom is always successful in the end. Now, many of Tom Swift's fictional inventions describe actual technological developments or predate technologies now considered commonplace. So, for example, Tom Swift, Among the Diamond Makers, one of his books from 1911, was based on Charles Parsons' attempts to synthesize diamonds using electric current. So don't discard, fiction. There is a lot of accuracy. There's a lot of great stuff in this series. Now, moving on, number 22 is the Rover Boys on the Ocean. So I covered Arthur Winfield, that pen name for Edward Stratemeyer, in previous videos for this series. So if you want more information on him, I will link down below those other videos. This is also in the literature category. Now, Stratemeyer did all of the writing himself for this series rather than hiring ghostwriters. I think this was his favorite. Now, while there are better known and longer running juvenile series, such as the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, and Tom Swift, the Rovers were still very successful and influential. They really established the template for all later Stratemeyer syndicate series. Number 23, we go back to another Tom Swift book, Tom Swift and His Air Scout, and again under literature. Now, like I said, several famous people, including Steve Wozniak and Isaac Asimov, have cited Tom Swift as their inspiration. Several inventions, including the taser, have been inspired allegedly by Swift's fictional inventions. In fact, taser is said to be an acronym for Thomas A. Swift's electric rifle. I thought that was really interesting. Moving on, number 24, another book in the literature category, is The Adventures of Pinocchio. This is authored by Carlo Collodi. He's an Italian author. That's his pen name, though. He was born Carlo Lorenzini in 1826, died in 1890, and he was better known by the pen name, of course, Carlo Collodi. Now, the reason for that name, his mother, Angiolina Orlazzi Lorenzini, was a seamstress from the town of Collodi, from which he took the pen name, and his father, Domenico Lorenzini, was a cook, and both worked for the Marchesi Ginori Licci. Probably not saying that right. Now, Carlo was the eldest in the family, and he had 10 siblings, but sadly 7 died at a young age. I cannot even imagine the heartbreak there. Now, he went to the seminary theological school, but he did not want to be a priest, and instead he worked at a bookstore, and there he met an Italian manuscript specialist, right? And like they say, the rest was history. Now, during the Italian Wars of Independence in 1848 and 1860, Collodi served as a volunteer with the Tuscan army. Now, Lorenzi became fascinated by the idea of using amiable, rascally characters as a means of expressing his own convictions through allegory, much in the same way as you see in Aesop's fables, right? 1880, he wrote The Adventures of Pinocchio. Now, you probably all know this watching. Pinocchio was adapted into a 1940s film by Disney that is considered to be one of Disney's greatest films ever made. And, you know, I'm not like a huge Disney fan at all or anything, but that film did make an impression on me. And I think it stands out from other Disney films. I know Disney still today will try to do the whole right versus wrong, but yeah, I don't know. It's not the same, you know, as like Pinocchio. It was very apparent, and consequences of lying, consequences of disobeying parents. You know, I just think it's a lot different than the Disney movies of today. Number 25 is the Rover Boys on a Tour. So again, another Rover Boys book under the category of literature. Now, at this point, I wanted to share with you, if you have maybe girls and at this point they're like, another Rover Boys book, I think personally it's okay to, at this point, you know, swap out with some maybe other feminine series for girls. Some of my favorites are the Outdoors Girls, which is a lot, very, very similar to the Rover Boys. Just, it's a girl cast, right? This is by Laura Lee Hope, who also wrote the Bobbsey Twins. Another great series is Elsie Dinsmore. I feel like when my girls read that, they appreciated their family life more, their parents, their family, their siblings, right? Black Beauty is another one. Beautiful Girlhood, that's another one that we've swapped out. And if you'd like, I can list those down below if you want to check them out. Number 26 is The Swiss Family Robinson. Very famous book. This is under the category of literature by Johann David Wyss. This was written in 1812, and the story is about a Swiss family of immigrants whose ship en route to Port Jackson, Australia, goes off course and is shipwrecked in the East Indies. Now, this novel, originally, you know, his intent was to teach his 4 sons about family values, good husbandry, and uses of natural world and self-reliance. Wyss's attitude towards his education is in line with the teachings of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and many chapters involve Christian-orientated moral lessons such as frugality, husbandry, acceptance, and cooperation. I think it's an excellent book. The book presents a geographically impossible array of large mammals and plants that probably could never have existed together on a single island. But, for the sake of the children's education, for the sake of the book, nourishment, clothing, and convenience, through the magic of television, as they say, it was possible in this book. Now, Wiss's novel is also modeled after Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, an adventure story about a shipwrecked sailor, first published in 1719, and the source of the Robinson in the title Swiss Family Robinson. So that's where that comes from. Number 27, what more can I say? It's another Rover Boys book on Treasure Island. So again, under the category of literature. Now, number 28, we go back to a Margaret Sidney book, and that is Ben Pepper. This is another book in the series, in the Pepper series. This is under literature, written by Margaret Sidney. I talked a lot about her in the previous videos, so make sure to check that out if you're interested in her story. Her pen name was Harriet. That's her pen name, Margaret Sidney. Her real name is Harriet Lathorpe, 1844 to 1924. The Pepper family, again, I'll make it brief here, just to explain they live poor lives, but they're happy. But then Phronsie is kidnapped and rescued by a family that lives in luxury, and they bring them with them. But they have hard work, humility, and togetherness, still thanks to Mamsie. And she delighted in creating imaginary people. She wrote constantly. Her first published story was in 1878 at the age of 34. She married, she gave birth to a daughter at age 40. They lived in the famous Wayside House, which I believe belonged to the Ingalls. And she founded and was the first member of the Children of the American Revolution. Very patriotic. All right, number 29 on the Robinson curriculum book list is Uncle Remus. Now, this is one of those books that has a little bit of controversy surrounding it. So before I get to the controversial part, let me just tell you what the book is about and who wrote it. It was written by Joel Chandler Harris, and this falls under the category of the RC book list of social studies and literature. Now, Uncle Remus is the fictional title character and narrator of a collection of African-American folk tales compiled and adapted and published in book form in 1881. He was born in Eatonton, Georgia, where he served as an apprentice on a plantation during his teenage years. So this is where he heard these stories. Harris spent most of his adult life in Atlanta after that, working as an associate editor at the Atlanta Constitution. Now, Harris led two professional lives. As the editor and journalist known as Joe Harris, he supported a vision of the New South with the editor Henry W. Grady, which stressed regional and racial reconciliation after the Reconstruction era. As Joel Chandler Harris, fiction writer, that's the other role, and folklorist, he wrote many B-R-E-R is meant to be brother, like Brr Rabbit, I'm not going to say it right, stories from the African-American oral tradition and helped revolutionize literature in the process. So he's hearing these stories. These are stories traditionally passed down in the African-American community, and he turned them into a book series. Now, what exactly is this series about? Uncle Remus is a collection of animal stories, songs, just oral stories passed down, collected from Southern Black Americans. Now, many of these stories are didactic. What that means is it's just like Aesop's fables or Jean de La Fontaine's stories. Uncle Remus is a kindly old freed man who serves as a storytelling device, passing on these tales like the traditional African griot to children gathered around him. That word griot means like a storyteller. There was always one in the community, passing down these stories. Now, these stories are written in an I dialect, devised by Harris to represent a deep South Black dialect. So I don't know if maybe that's off-putting to some people. You can see it here at the top of the screen. This is saying like, you can hide the fire, but what you're going to do with smoke, but it's written in this way. And I know some parents and their kids have a hard time reading it, and this is why they might choose an audio version for this book. I consider it the same as when reading The Secret Garden and it has all that Yorkshire. I can't pronounce that either. I try my best to just read it as it is. It can be a little bit challenging. Now, B-R-E-R, which is brother, Brother Rabbit, is the main character of the stories, a character prone to tricks and troublemaking who is often opposed by Brother Fox and Brother Bear. Now, Mary Harris worked as a seamstress and helped neighbors with their gardening to support herself and her son. She was an avid reader and instilled in her son a love of language. He said, "My desire to write, to give expression to my thoughts, grew out of hearing my mother read The Vicar of Wakefield," which is also a book on the RC book list. Now, on July 3rd, 1908, Joel Chandler Harris died of acute nephritis. That's a cirrhosis of the liver complication. Uncle Remus, this was the quote in the paper, "Uncle Remus cannot die. Joel Chandler Harris has departed this life at the age of 60, but his best creation, Uncle Remus, with his fund of folklore, will live in literature." So it's like his legacy. Now let's talk about some of the things that make it a little controversial with parents. Now, white critics were mad at the time when this came out that he was basically a secretary for local blacks and that his work did not represent white Georgia but black Georgia. So he really got it from all angles, and we're going to talk about all those angles. On one hand, you have white critics who are saying, "You just were their secretary, you just wrote down their stories, this is not representative of you." I guess, the whole cultural appropriation or whatever that is, they're calling him out on that. This is not you, this is them, and you're the messenger, you're the secretary. Now, Keith Cartwright, however, asserts Harris might arguably be called the greatest single authorial force behind the literary development of African American folk matter and manner. So some people praised him. Now, in more recent times, in 1981, the writer Alice Walker, who is famous and she wrote the novel The Color Purple, accused Harris of stealing a good part of her heritage in a searing essay called Uncle Remus, No Friend of Mine. Now, I read that essay and I understand where she's coming from. She was upset that these stories that are part of her community, her culture, were passed down in this very commercialized way. And then when Disney picked it up, that really did not sit well with, I don't know if it was the whole community, but at least her perspective, her family. And even when they started creating movies and the whole town would go and watch these movies, you would see the white families in the white preferred section and the black families in the black section. So you could see how that could build up some kind of, I don't want to say bitterness, but it's very off-putting resentment that they're watching these African American, folklore tales, and they're having to sit in the black section while the white families are up front. So that became so off-putting to, I think, a lot of people that it seems like they just stopped passing down these stories. I mean, I don't know. Please, let's have a discussion in the comments below. Let's have an honest, intelligent conversation. I think we can all be civil about this. And I'd like to know, what are your thoughts? Is this off-putting to you, or do you think it was a great thing to pass these down in book format? Because honestly, are they really being passed down anymore today? Was that the reason why they stopped being orally passed down, or there are other factors? Because recently, I remember even my pastor had asked, and we have a very diverse, large congregation, and he referenced something to one of the books, and he said, raise your hand. Did anybody read Uncle Remus growing up? And nobody raised their hand. Nobody knew what he was the reference he was talking about. So obviously there are stories that are it doesn't seem like they're being passed down. Correct me if I'm wrong. If they are being passed down still orally in that traditional way, I'd love to hear about it. Let me know in the comments below. But it seems like a lot of people from that community, they don't know about these stories, today. Now, Julius Lester, who is a Black folklorist and university professor, he sees the Uncle Remus stories as important records of Black folklore. He wrote, and quote, "There are no inaccuracies in Harris' characterization of Uncle Remus. Even the most cursory reading of the slave narratives collected by the Federal Writers Project of the 1930s reveals that there were many slaves who fit the Uncle Remus mold." So it's not inaccurate. He really did, he was very careful. He did a great job at preserving and passing down these stories. But I understand how at that time, it could be off-putting to an audience, seeing their culture, just like Native Americans today probably don't like seeing Native American Halloween costumes or what have you, I get it. Now, more recently, the scholars Henry Louis Gates Jr. and Maria Tadar debated whether to include Uncle Remus stories in their 2017 volume, The Annotated African American Folk Tales. Ultimately, they decided on inclusion along with a detailed preface on the critical issues surrounding Harris, race, and again, that word that we see now all the time, cultural appropriation. So I have a couple of the books here. This is Uncle Remus, His Songs and His Sayings. So obviously a reprint. These are reprints. I did buy an original one time on eBay, but it was falling apart. And here we have the complete tales of Uncle Remus. So you can find lots of quality reprints. Yes, I understand it could be a little difficult to read, but that's why a lot of parents choose to do an audio version when it comes to this book. And yes, I even know, some parents decide to skip it. I get it. I understand. But what are your thoughts on that? Is it better to lose that information if it's not passed down, or to preserve it forever in history? Would it have been better if an African American published it? But what if, they didn't have that opportunity to publish it? Would you rather have it published by a white man or not at all? These are all questions that I'm wondering. And if you'd like to chime in, please do so in the comments down below. Let's have a conversation about it. But that is how I can best sum up for you and wrap up Uncle Remus. Why it's on the list, because obviously it's a very important book in history. Today, yes, there's mixed opinions on it, but even when people struggle with it, like we talked about, they'll still include it in popular works and series and catalogs and things like that. Now, just my thoughts personally, I'm a big fan of storytelling. I don't have that much to tell my children, I feel like, but I'm trying to think of just little stories from me growing up. My husband does the same, of him growing up, funny stories, serious stories. We try to share that and pass them down. And our kids always, even though they've heard them so many times, they still like, Mom, please tell us that story of this and this, or Dad, tell us your story again. Kids love hearing stories and they want to hear them again and again. It anchors them. It's part of their childhood, that chain in history, that generational chain. So these stories from Uncle Remus, I feel like they are very important and they should be passed down. Are we passing them down today orally? Fine, not my community, but the original community it came from. Are they passing those stories down? It looks to me, and maybe I'm wrong, that they're not being passed down. So at least they're preserved in this book format. Is it unfortunate when it gets all commercialized and Disney adapts it? Well, same thing with Pinocchio as well. It is what it is. It brings more of an audience to it, and then hopefully they'll go, oh, let me read the original, right? So that's why I believe it's on the list. It does have historical value. It is very important to pass down these stories, no matter who you are, what the color of your skin is. I think there's value in listening to these stories, and I'm glad that they were preserved for us. With that being said, it's not lost on me, though, how it could be off-putting to generations in the past. But do they have to be off-putting to generations today? That's the question. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. So that's it for this video, this list. We will continue the series, of course. Now I have a quote for you here. I think it's a great quote. It is a good rule after reading a new book, never to allow yourself another new one till you have read an old one in between. And I've read the rest of this quote saying, if you can't do that, at least for every 3 new books that you read, you should read an old book. And I think it's pretty obvious the quality of the literature. Ideas, ideas never get old. Books get old, and we may forget about books, but those ideas, they don't get old. They're timeless, they're classics, they're excellent, and they have this way of passing down these morals and character and husbandry, like even Robinson Crusoe, all of that in this book format that is enjoyable for kids to read and learn with. So I want to encourage you there, pick up some old books. If you'd like to find my recommendation for reprints, if when you buy the Robinson curriculum, you have the files, you can print them. And I have lots of bookbinding tutorials. But if you just want to purchase them, I'm putting together a website page here where I list my favorite reprints. For example, really quickly, These Rover Boy reprints from Amazon with the red cover, I would say no. They are a no-go. I have high standards when it comes to reprints. These are cheap, but they're not enjoyable to read. However, New West Press, I did a live stream on them recently. They have really excellent reprints. You can get hardcover binding. This one has a jacket even. They're beautiful. So not all reprints are created equal. You can also find my bookbinding tutorials here on YouTube. There's a playlist. I will link it down below. Different ways using a comb binder, just using the Epson printer and a two-prong hole system. Lots of different methods there. And I invite you to join me in the Modern League of Teacher Mothers. This is where I host live Q&As, coffee chats. We have our own book club. I share read aloud recommendations, books that are not on the RC book list, but also of high quality books that you can read aloud to your family. I offer a private video every month, plus another video on additional training. And you can also view my entire Sustainable Homeschooling 101 course there included, and I'll be hosting some giveaways. All this for just $10 a month. You can cancel anytime. That price will be going up soon, so become a founding member today for just $10 a month and lock in that price. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this type of video, please smash that like button, give it a thumbs up, and that way we will continue the series. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in another video. Bye.